Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the meeting. This meeting is being held remotely due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 allows us to hold remote meetings during the pandemic because in-person meetings or meetings conducted under Section 13D.02 is not practical or prudent because of the health pandemic or an emergency declared under Chapter 12. With that, welcome to today's meeting, and at this time, I'll turn it to our facilitator, Paul Williams.
Thank you, Rosalind. Welcome, everybody. Happy Monday. Happy fall. I don't know, maybe we're tumbling into winter here. I think I saw my first snowflake on the 7-day forecast coming up later this week. Great to have you, and just want to start out by saying thank you to everybody for funneling a lot of information into the process here for some really good work. I think over these last, I can't even know, is it 4 or 5, 6 weeks, to kind of get to this point, and a huge thank you to the staff for, I think, some really good work, kind of trying to bundle and capture and kind of encapsulate everything that we've been working on. A lot of good work. Want to share just talk about our agenda today. Today is largely about beginning to prioritize and kind of work through our themes and specifics. We have some updated themes here that staff is sharing. Can you maximize that at all? Can you get that a little bit bigger? So we had one council member was submitting their rankings literally just as we were meeting last week, and so this reflects that update, and it changed kind of just the order of the categories very slightly. In essence, previously workforce was followed by housing. Those two really are kind of evened up now more or less in terms of kind of priority ranking for the category in terms of the overall votes. Everything else kind of, for the most part, I think remains the same. So we just wanted to let you know what that overall chart was looking like. We'll come back to this with a question later on as to whether we want to do some ranking in our final recommendations around the categories, as well as pulling out some of the specific ideas or strategies within those categories as kind of top line priorities for us. So more to come on that. If you can go to the next slide. So just our agenda today, we're gonna go through the themes and just kind of review the top ideas or strategies within each of the categories, all 8 of the categories, and really just kind of talk through them. We're not going to revisit what's the intent of this. I think we've all been talking about this. We kind of know what's in there. The staff, I think, has done a good job of just capturing the primary strategy and the problem that we're trying to solve for each of those. We're going to be kind of just taking some time to look at kind of each theme and see other things that we want to add. Is there something missing? That kind of thing. Hoping to cover that in about 8 minutes per theme. Again, just trying to manage our time. We will be in the full group all day today for our full meeting for 2 hours. So I want to encourage you. We've got some ground rules here, but I want to encourage you to weigh in. We'll review each of the ideas theme by theme within each of the themes, and basically say, does this work for everyone? And if yes, we'll move on to the next theme. If no, what works here? What's missing? Are there adjustments that we need to make? Again, just trying to refine a little bit And then if you can go to the next slide, we'll just have some ground rules for that. So again, we want to not reinvent the whole discussion about each theme. We also don't want to kind of get on our collective soapboxes, and I know I'm good at doing that myself. So I'll withhold, right? I'll try to do my best to stay out of that, but we don't want to kind of rehash the whole idea. We want to look for adjustments, tweaks, those kinds of things. Just raise your hand, give us a shout if you've got something that you want to add. In the chat, we'd like you to say, are you generally in support of this? If you are, just put that into the chat, and again, we'll have staff kind of tracking that. Again, we're trying to drive towards making some decisions today, and we encourage you obviously to share the floor and try to stay kind of succinct in our discussions. Let me see, just in terms of we'll do that we'll take the bulk of the meeting to kind of work through that. And then we've got some time towards the end of the meeting to really come back together and just ask the question, do we want to do some additional prioritizing? And so the thought here is, I think we've got a format here where we've got 8 categories, 8 themes that I think we have done some prioritizing and ranking around that we feel passionate about. I think our report to the governor is that these 8 areas are really critical, and we want you to pay attention to these. Within these 8 areas, there's about 20 specific ideas or strategies that we also think are important, and we really want you to pay attention to these as you kind of do your prioritizing and going into this negotiation with the legislature. But I want to challenge us to think about, hey, are there 5 or 6 or 7 of these that we really want to pull out, right? We know from our initial ranking that we had some specific ideas that really did have some clear prioritization behind them. So we have an opportunity. We could do another round of ranking coming out of this list of 20, and then identify those top. I think Jeff did a really good job of framing this, for me at least, in saying, we're going to take the 8 themes, we're going to take the 20 recommendations forward, but do we also want to say to the governor, here's 5 or 6 that really do kind of rise to the top for us collectively. We also have the option to say, amongst these 8 very important categories, are there 3 or 4 categories? And again, when you look at that box chart, I think you'll see that the top 3, housing, workforce, small business entrepreneurship, really do, in the initial vote at least, really do rise to the top as pretty clearly in terms of our initial rankings. They really do rise to the top. And so again, in our final recommendations, do we want to do some further prioritizing? So I think we're close. It's always dangerous to say that, but I really do think we're close. I think we've got some good language. We're still talking about numbers and what are the dollar amounts, and in earlier versions, we had some dollar amounts. I'm going to cover those verbally today, and we'll try and get those back in there. It's important. In some cases, we don't have necessarily enough information. In some cases, these are kind of more concepts and strategies that we think are critical. They don't necessarily have a specific number. So there's more work to be done on that. And I know that's an important piece of making a decision about, geez, do I, do I rank this higher because of that relative to something else? And so just more work to come on kind of the costs. So let me stop there and just see, are there questions on just kind of process and kind of the information that's kind of come to us going into today's session? No? Jeff, anything that you want to add as we head into this?
Nope, I think we're ready to go.
All right, so let's, and again, I'm assuming everyone has the guiding principles, the recommendations document. That's the 8-page document. There we go. So this first category of housing, we have again the top three in this category. The first of which was really around new production, and really this is just finding a way, again, this concept of a surge for new production accompanying what was what is, you know, kind of that bonding and other funding that the state has every year. There was a general price tag of you know, $100 million, which was kind of put in there to mirror what the state does in housing infrastructure bonding. Again, but the emphasis here was on that one-time surge. That second strategy around existing housing, again, I know we had some different thoughts about should these be combined. For now, we've kept them separate. That's around naturally occurring affordable housing, really preserving the housing that we have in such a hot housing market. A lot of that is kind of at risk of being turned into market rate housing. So this would be, again, additional funding to kind of support that. And that third piece was around home ownership. And I think there was in one version, there was a $5.75 million price tag on this. I had a document that I think was sent to staff from what's called the Home Coalition, which is a lot of the home ownership production folks who were suggesting a much higher dollar amount for this, more like $120 million. Again, I think that was more of a broader approach to the state and to the governor, but clear emphasis there on home ownership for BIPOC communities. So any again in the chat, if you can share your thumbs up or not so much thumbs up or thumbs down, but any revisions to this, anything that we've missed here?
Can I ask a quick question, Paul?
Yeah.
The $100 million for the first one, maybe you mentioned it, but could somebody just spend 30 seconds and tell us how that number came about? Because I could imagine spending $1 billion on that.
Yeah, I can, again, I was the author of this one, and again, there's the group called Homes for All Coalition I was working off of. That is the primary housing advocacy coalition. They didn't have that number. They had a pretty big number. They had big numbers for both rental as well as preservation. And I just kind of lifted those numbers out of there, primarily trying to mirror that $100 million that has been going into housing infrastructure bonds. So kind of viewing it as a bit of a match. There are other dollars that the Housing Finance Agency, and they reached out actually and said that they'd like that to not just be tied to housing infrastructure bonds, but other funding they'd like more flexibility actually with those dollars. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you could spend $1 billion on housing, and the notion is let's have a surge that somehow matches that. So the number is imperfect for sure.
Fair enough. My only comment is if there's such a huge need, I would just say err on doing too much, not too little.
Right. Joe, I see your hand up there.
Yeah, for me, I think it would create quite a problem and actually exacerbate one of the issues that we have within affordable, or I should say multifamily housing, more than just the affordable portion, if it does not have prevailing wage attached to it. I think that is absolutely critical to have prevailing wage attached to the affordable housing construction. And I think that is one of those $1 turns into 2, turns into 3 of investment, but without going deep into that, it's important, I think, to have that attached.
Again, I don't want to weigh in on every one of these, but Joe, I went back and checked with our housing development people, and any project that uses any state government dollars, Davis-Bacon applies, which is prevailing wage. The state has its own prevailing wage requirement, which is even more rigorous, which applies to all of these dollars. And then there's also Section 3 requirements, which also relate to use of union labor, BIPOC labor, prevailing wage. So I think that issue is very much covered in the existing systems already, and I double checked that with our folks who actually have to build this stuff.
Okay.
Marcus?
Yes, thanks for this. This makes sense. And this is kind of to Neil's question earlier. As we're thinking about amounts, and this goes to all sections that we're going to talk about, we need to have maybe a separate conversation about budgets, because you could spend $1 billion on probably all of the different things that we're going to talk about today. But given we're setting a budget, we should have the conversation about what's important first, and then the dollar amounts maybe secondary, or have a separate conversation, because you could change just like you did with the home ownership one, 5 million was the ask, but 100 million, it gets to the point of like, we're focusing on BIPOC household ownership versus a specific program that is advocating for $5.75 million, right? And that can kind of apply for all of it, is that we get specific in that we want to address home ownership, but not someone's maybe agenda already, because that we can get ourselves in a lot of trouble if we hit just one agenda point versus like the multitude that's out there. It's the only comment I want to make. Thanks.
Yep. It's a fair point. And again, we've been going in the leadership group, we've been going back and forth on that really for the last couple of weeks about some of these things have specific price tags. What is that tied to? A belief that we need to have something to grab onto, that it's more than just voting for a concept. And I think you make a very good point, though. What's the principle? What's the concept that we believe in here? And again, it may be that staff can do a little bit more work, but I think that's going to be imperfect even going forward. Other comments or any comments on that question? Those questions.
Paul, just quickly, there's a comment in the chat. Jeff has asked the question, in light of our conversation today with Latino Lead, should both 1A and 1B more explicitly mention Greater Minnesota as part of the projects?
Again, just happened to hang out in this space a fair amount. The state, in all of its allocation processes, already has a statewide funding mechanism, and the general some believe that system actually already overcompensates for Greater Minnesota housing needs relative to population size. Again, you've got an existing decision-making structure, and I think that, so we could put that in there, but I think that is an issue that is better aimed at the decision-making entity, i.e. Minnesota Housing. So, Joe, did you have a comment on that?
The only other thing I was going to comment on, not specific to Greater Minnesota, is the thought of the government getting involved to help projects pencil out. Maybe that's how you could expand the use of that $100 million, right? So instead of just $100 million towards the multifamily housing side and affordable housing, if a portion of that or a smaller additional portion was used to help pencil out privately funded projects, and then that attached the prevailing wage requirements and all that to it, does that get you more for the money that you're putting in? Because there are projects out there that want to get built, and they just need to get that gap funding, we'll call it. And maybe that's another way to more affordably build more units. Don't know, but maybe if it was, that might be an opportunity to kind of expand what that dollar can buy.
Other, I'm not able to really kind of monitor the chat. Are folks comfortable with this set of recommendations at this point? 1A, 1B, and 1C. And again, anything that we need to add to it. I see various thumbs up coming up. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna take that as, I see lots of thumbs ups. Okay. So we'll move on to workforce. We've got three, let's see, 1D, 2A and 2B. Under workforce, we have the skilling, reskilling, and upskilling through the industry partnerships. The strategy here is partner with technology, construction, healthcare, hospitality, manufacturing, and energy industry. Grants for skilling and upskilling or reskilling workers. I think there was $170 million cost estimate that was tied to this, again, in one of our earlier version. And again, I'm just looking at the solution here. That piece, funds would include a state workforce systems upgrade. Not sure what that referred to specifically. That might be the workforce, the state data tracking system, perhaps. Second strategy here talks about the cohort model to increase diversity, looking specifically at manufacturing and healthcare as kind of two really critical industries in particular. Looking to increase quality jobs for BIPOC and women workers and to address the workforce shortage. I didn't see, do we have the author of this this particular strategy?
It's Tracy Tapney.
And did we have a dollar amount estimate at all, a ballpark estimate on this?
You know, I didn't because I don't know. I mean, I'm sure that I could work with somebody to try to figure something out, but like I, told everybody when I was asked about this on Friday, it's not like I had time to fully develop a program. I have some ideas about this, so sorry. I mean, I'm a manufacturer. It's not my area of expertise to develop something like this.
Okay, we can come back on that. Makes total sense. Joe, I'll come to you here in a minute. I see somebody else has their hand up. All it says is plus 18 with a hand up.
I don't know if that's me. I have my hand up, but is my name not showing up?
It's not. I'm sorry. Brenda, nice to see you.
Hi. I just wanted to make sure that we had included something in here where I think the workers that are being impacted by these programs are somehow involved in the creation and driving of them, whether that's through labor management partnerships or some other way. But, I mean, I would strongly recommend having a labor management partnership around creating these programs in order to have the highest level of success.
And is that, Brenda, is that something that you would want to do in the very short run, or is that something as we follow up on this, or as this goes as a recommendation, is that something that you would want to have follow up on and more engagement, in the next month or so, or is it something you could turn around quickly here in the next day or two?
I just think I don't think I need to turn it around in a day or two. We can continue to talk about it. I just think it would be a really critical component of any of these programs.
Yeah. Okay, great point.
And I don't know how to lower my hand, so there we go.
There you go. Other thoughts? Joe, come back to you.
Mine would be as related to just what is it Brenda? I can't see all the names. It just mentioned about the LMC. I was going to say that these partnerships between industry and the training groups, you need the LMC, because otherwise it's not a partnership with the industry that it's related to. And I think that these grants should be based off of not just the amount of people that can come into the program, but the amount of people that graduate a program and are retained within whatever respective industry they're going into. From my perspective, I see a lot of it where different groups trying to train people with certain skills for the industry, ours specifically being construction, don't have those partnerships with the contractors. They don't have that LMC. So people graduate the program and don't actually end up with a job opportunity because those two aren't interlinked. And that's what you need to have a successful program. So LMCs are great. And if you actually have a partnership with the industry you're in, that shouldn't be a problem. But I think the money needs to be tied to retainage, not just acceptance into the program, but graduation from whatever program it is.
So to the staff, so let's add in the solution. Can we add some language around retention, graduation metrics as a key element of the strategy? Okay. Other comments, thoughts? All right, in the chat, any thumbs ups on this one? I love the way these thumbs just all of a sudden appear on the screen. That's remarkable technology. All right. Okay, so that's item 2. Item 3 is around entrepreneurship and small business. Again, just a few different, 3 different strategies here. One is the accelerating the angel tax credit. There's a specific number in this one, 90 million for the tax credit, and then 50 million in a complementary grant program tied to BIPOC businesses. Second strategy is around a BIPOC small business ecosystem, kind of a broad strategy, and this one, in fact, does have a price tag, 543 million. And actually, Juhi did a wonderful job of sending a great program summary out to staff and leadership today that showed really it's a holistic approach, as it says in there, around technical assistance, lending, kind of building kind of skills, as well as cultural corridor reinvestment. And that overall strategy actually had a price tag of 1.15 billion. My guess is that coalition, which again it really has most of the primary small business investment entities and culturally specific entrepreneurship organizations as part of that coalition. My guess is they were saying, hey, if we had 1.1 billion, how would we spend it? Here's how we would spend it. So there's again, big idea, big concept, and really a holistic model. So I don't know if Juhi is here today.
She could not be with us today, Paul, but we can follow up with her. And in talking to her about this idea, I think like many of these, it scales up and down based on, the size that you're able to engage it on.
Yep. Okay. And then the item 3C there is about seeding and scaling funding. And again, I know Nanoko sent a note right before the meeting started. I did not get a chance to read the whole thing, but I saw that the suggestion is to split these two into seeding and scaling funding for nonprofits as a distinct sector or group of entities, and then seeding and scaling funding for local governments. I think all with the goal of kind of helping seed funding and scale funding for great ideas and good work that is moving. Did I capture that, Nanoko?
Sort of, yes. So I was able to talk to the author of the proposal. One of the biggest issues that MCN had with this is the fact that it doesn't address the operational and the capacity needs of nonprofits in order for them to scale or to seed new ideas. But I understand the sort of the intent behind the proposal that folks had voted on. And so our suggestion is to, one, split apart governments and nonprofits, and for the nonprofit sector to actually help fund the operations, and then also any scaling that qualified organizations that feel that they can do that can also apply to.
Okay. Okay. So again, we throw 3C turns into, and was there was $100 million price tag attached to this at some point, and I'm not sure if that would be split with these two, just conceptually at least, or or not? Any sense of that, Nanoko?
So the Nonprofit Recovery and Resiliency Fund, yes, is a $100 million ask. I see Scott is raising his hand. I'm not sure whether that was also the intent, but yeah, I mean, if it's a split, that's fine.
I don't know that I have any special knowledge behind, or special idea about how it would be split, to be honest. I mean, I think that you can see that nonprofits are not called specifically out in the other ideas. And I think that, it's warrants significant funding given the needs in the nonprofit sector right now. So I really like Noko's idea of splitting the idea and just having some clarity that the nonprofit sector is kind of defining its own needs a little more than the way the original idea was written. I think is a big improvement. So it might become 3C and 3D just for clarity purposes. And I think I would at least endorse the drafting that she did on it. It looked great to me.
Okay, are other folks? Yep.
I don't know about the number though. Sorry, Paul,
Sorry.
Let's do 100 million for both.
Okay, all right. Folks good with that? Okay, so that one again, we've got angel tax credit, small business ecosystem, seed and scale funding for nonprofits, seed and scale funding for governmental entities. All right. Any other revisions, refinements? Yep, Joe?
As I'm thinking about what the intent of this is it appropriate to say that we would want to put some sort of a qualifier on there that who's receiving this funding is producing it? For every dollar that they're getting, are they getting $1 back out of it, right? We're supposed to be investing in this stuff. So where is the economic activity coming from? If it's some nonprofits, it's really a tax base, right? So it doesn't mean that they have different things that they're trying to do, each nonprofit. But this money should be going to ones that are creating economic output or driving that or helping sustain that or grow that. And I think that's a really broad brush, but that's, I think, the intent that we're trying to do is grow economic opportunities. So if there's some lens to be able to qualify through that, that's what I was going to say.
Nanoko, you have a thought on that?
A rebuttal? Of course. So two things. One is that if we are asking for specific metrics of success, then that should apply to every single proposal that is on this document. That should not apply only to nonprofits. Secondly, I think that if you don't have the fundamental foundation, it's impossible to scale. So who is determining what the success rate is going to be the biggest question I have. And I also think that there is a really big challenge, especially for small BIPOC, culture-specific nonprofits, to not necessarily have the resources to be able to track data in a way that a lot of people expect. And so that means that we should be funding nonprofits to be able to produce that metrics or not produce these barriers that are going to continue to exacerbate the disparities that exist for the nonprofit sector.
Anybody else have a thought on this question? And this question of metrics and what is that investment driving towards?
Joe, was your question a question of the measurement of the output or the qualification to receive the funds? There was kind of a chicken and the egg question of those who could receive the funds versus those that have to prove their value.
I think it could be both. If there is a way that, the nonprofit, maybe they're working towards, financial literacy and working and trying to educate people on how to manage money and work with them on some of the, liabilities that they have financially, and then trying to help them, find work or whatever it may be. There's an economic opportunity, right? They're trying to provide that or help somebody become economically stable. That to me is what this is about. So just looking at it through that lens of so that investment of $1 turns into $3 of, well, tax base or whatever it may be, right? Long term, that's the idea, is to try to get everybody financially stable, hopefully, obviously, long term. I know that's a very rosy picture, but that's the intent and then, so it's not $100 million going into whatever industry, whether it's nonprofits or any of these ideas, and it goes away and we don't have $100 million worth of economic output or growth.
Marcus?
Yeah, just I want to double tap on what Anoko said. I mean, when we separate out these programs, like this one is specific for nonprofits, similar to specific for small business or innovative business or everything. You should have metrics that go towards the program that we're trying to support. So if it's housing, affordable housing, yes, there's going to be metrics that you actually delivered those housing. But be careful, and to Noko's point, if you're going to put undue burden on nonprofits to prove what they're worth just to get the funding to do what they need to do to get their business back in order, we're asking something different than we would be for the for-profit sector. So just being able to delineate where are we going to put metrics and what kind of metrics are we going to put, and not putting undue burden on other populations that we wouldn't for everybody.
So again, it's really good discussion, and I'll just say, just reflecting back on all of our deliberations, and Joe, I get your point here. I guess I disagree a little bit though, in that part of what this council has said almost from the beginning is that, you know what, mental health is critical to economic expansion, and childcare is critical to economic expansion. And youth engagement is critical to economic expansion, and housing is critical to economic expansion. And so your question about, let's make sure that whatever we're investing in is contributing to economic expansion, the whole conversation of this council really has been around, let's recognize that there are many elements to that picture. And as a matter of fact, some would argue that if we don't get housing figured out, if we don't get childcare figured out, ain't nobody expanding in any direction, right? So I think it's been part of our kind of deliberations from the beginning. Jeff.
Yeah, I'll flip back in support of Joe. I mean, I agree that nonprofits should not be held to for-profit measurements. But I do think it's important that it be held to some measurements. I mean, I don't think we should spend $100 million just to make nonprofits bigger with no requirements whatsoever as to what the output is. And I'm sure that's not what Nanoko's suggesting. I'm just saying, I just think we should have results-specific things in there that are appropriate for nonprofits.
So let's see, are there other hands that I'm missing?
Just a quick question on that. So when we talk about in the other ones, let's go with angel tax credit or even small business development. When we look at those metrics, I mean, there should be a point, there should be some metrics, but are we holding them to how well they are contributing to our state, or just the elements of how they qualify for the funding? And maybe that's a philosophical question at this stage.
Yeah.
But like, we don't want to have these other metrics that show up that, not that they're the same standard, but like, why are we putting metrics to it? To what point?
Yeah, Marcus, it's a great question, because I think, and the way I read this, when I read the first idea about sort of testing new ideas, measuring them if they're successful, if they are successful, scaling them, was much more like kind of an innovation in government idea. It wasn't really okay, we've got a small business idea for the small businesses, we have a nonprofit idea for the nonprofits. It wasn't through that lens. It was through the lens of like, boy, in a crisis, when innovation is essential, wouldn't it be nice to have a platform upon which those who are helping improve society can test stuff they haven't tested before and have a safe place to fail? Because if they fail, it's fine, and if they don't, by whatever metric, they succeed and scale. And that was kind of the spirit of this idea, which is, I guess, a little bit different than saying, let's give some money to nonprofits, but measure their success and see if they're worthy of it. Because I agree, that feels like sort of unfair. You bring up Angel and other things like, are we putting nonprofits to some giant bar to jump over versus small business? No, of course not. But I don't know, Scott, is that a fair assessment of kind of the original intent of this, in the sense of like, let's create kind of a lane for new ideas in government that we can scale if they work, and kind of the only way you know if they work is if you measure something to see if they worked or not? Is that where you were getting at in the original text?
Sort of that was the first part of it, and then obviously having money to then triple and double and triple up on things that are working is the other part of it, which I think we're actually an example of us doing that. Some of the money we're putting into housing, right? Taking something that's working, putting more money into it. I think that creating a mechanism for doing that was my intent. I have personally a lot more familiarity with how government programs, operate. I'm not an expert in the nonprofit sector, so I thought that having that in place for local and state government, I think Nonoko's recent draft says government rather than just local government, which I think is appropriate, creates the kind of funding you just described, funding to start and fail and innovate, and funding to scale. I struggle on the nonprofit side. I know that it's hard to put criteria to things. I would note on the angel tax credit idea that it's just easier to put a criteria in place that's naturally holding somebody to some accountability, because in the angel tax credit, you have to go raise money in the private sector. I'm not saying that's a perfect barometer, but you do have to raise money, and then that triggers a match and whatever. I think in nonprofits, it's tricky because you can't do a matching grant, through these funds. We couldn't do a matching grant for donations to nonprofits, but it would be good to have some mechanism that skews the funds towards the outcomes we're interested in versus just, general support that gets spread really thin. I don't know, Nonoko, do you have any ideas about how it could be more focused versus more spread, at least in these funds?
I think the biggest thing that I can say about this right now is let the nonprofits decide how to measure their successes. It is like we are a wide range of sectors, and it's hard for me to just be like, here's this one particular nonprofit and here's how they measure their successes. In some ways, like some nonprofits, their measurement of success is that they no longer have to exist. So does that like appeal to this idea beyond like expansion, when they were able to solve some sort of societal issue that the community has been plagued, and they don't necessarily have to grow anymore? But that is actually, tripping towards the economic expansion. I think what I'm having a problem with is the fact that nonprofits, we are a sector, we're 13% of the Minnesota economy. It is still an ecosystem where there are organizations that close all the time because they're no longer relevant in the community, and that is being met by foundations or funders. So there is a system in place to make sure that the need of the community is being met by whatever type of nonprofit that is meeting them. And I don't think this is the council for us to decide whether a big, well-established organization with a lot of resources should be the only ones receiving this fund. And actually, we're saying that it's not. We're trying to target small, BIPOC-led or rural or whatever it is. Like, that's what we're specifying. So if that's the center, and if they don't necessarily have the right development director, the right operate like financial CPAs or accounting in place, but they are still meeting the needs of the community, how are they? I mean, to me, I feel like it's this constant battle of nonprofits being asked to go through a hurdle. I mean, look how much time we're spending on trying to measure success of nonprofits compared to anything else that we've talked about today. And I think that is something that I feel really passionate about, because in some ways, like, there is not a trust in terms of the work that we're supposed to be doing. And I think we have deserved and have established our place in this economy as something that is very important and vital to economic expansion.
So your point, Scott, about innovation, that the focus here is on innovation in government and innovation in nonprofits, I think is an important one. And innovation in any sector is always a little bit of a uncertainty and a risk. And so isn't the measurement around how innovative is that idea, and how promising do we find that innovation? So whoever our delivery entity is, if this idea were to move forward, would be charged with, kind of assessing innovation and likelihood of success. So I don't know if I'm articulating anything significant there. Tracy, I saw you had your hand up, and then Joe, I still see you have your hand up, and then I'm going to try and move us on here, and we may we may just see if, again, if we need to somehow take a vote on this, we certainly can do that. Tracy?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, based on what I heard Nanoko say, and I agree and I appreciate what she's saying around that. But I think that with this one, just because it is so broad, the problem that might be worked on and what the needs of the community are. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to just add language, that says it's all dependent on what the need is that's identified, because all nonprofits are trying to fill some void, meet a particular need. We will never in this group be able to identify all of those things. But if I'm in rural Minnesota trying to deal with a, food desert issue, if we measure that that's decreased by the innovation that I did, well, that's great. And if we don't, we're saying it's a chance to innovate and try new ideas. The fact that we tried it and we found out something that didn't work, that's also success, right? I mean, that's the point of innovating and trying new things, is that, you're going to find value in failure as well, because you know that this thing is not the right way to go or whatever. I just think it's too broad, and just being more broad in saying it's all going to depend on what the need is that's trying to be met. Somebody's going to get money to try to meet some specific need. And at that point, some measure of success or failure may be determined.
Joe, you've had your hand up there for a while.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I was taking in what everybody was saying, and I'm not against any nonprofit or the good intent that they have for whatever they may be, their specific skill set is that they have. But I think as it goes with any of these ideas, they need to have some measurement of success so we can determine what we're going to invest in and what we're not, and whether it was a good investment or not. I mean, I can agree with Tracy that a failure can be viewed as a success, because now you go down that road again. But that's kind of like looking at the silver lining of something, and that's after the fact that the money was already used up in that scenario. And we've been tasked with making a difference in these communities, but also in trying to expand economic opportunity. So if we're using that as a bar, we should be able to measure to that somehow with whatever we're investing in. Doesn't matter if it's nonprofits or if it's housing, there should be some measurement that says this is the economic activity or how we're going to expand it, because that's what we've been tasked to do with this panel.
Okay, Jody and Marcus, and then I'm going to try and move us on. I'm not sure how, but I'm going to try and move us on. Jody?
Then actually, if I'm the last of the floor, I'm going to give it over to Marcus, because I'm just going to say, see what Marcus said in the comments. I think it is about, and that's the point I was trying to make earlier, is it a chicken or the egg, meaning who actually gets the money? And then that's as much about the application process that then determines how this goes about, versus anybody can get it and then we're going to measure after the fact. And I'm not saying it has to be an either or, but I think Marcus made a great point.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that, I mean, the idea here is that in the other three sections of the small business development, we were talking about specific segments of the economy that we wanted to address in small business. So we have these angel credits. We're going to these businesses that are going to be high growth, high tech, things like that. We said we want to invest in small BIPOC-owned businesses that are there. That's a segment of the economy. And now we're saying local government and nonprofit. That's different than like we're trying to create a seed or an innovation fund that is making the nonprofits do something different than they already do. We're actually like investing in them because we realize how important they are to the sector itself.
Okay, so again, I thank you, Steve. I've got the chat up here now. So Steve, to your point there, perhaps the success metrics for the innovation are determined jointly between state government and the partner, no matter what the organization is, but invest that organization in defining success. To me, I think that's actually an important role in many of these recommendations and investments that we're making. The implementer, the allocating entity, whoever it is, I think needs to be thinking about outcomes, impact, whatever the intent is. And I think in this case, the intent is innovation. The intent is to look for innovation in nonprofits, to look for innovation in government. And you know, I can just say that this question of outcomes and metrics in my long sorted nonprofit history and in government, having been in city government, you can spend your whole career trying to nail down outcomes and effectiveness and efficiencies. It's not that it's not important, but it's a very circular game and process. So again, I want to let's see how many thumbs ups we get on sticking with this language as is, with the separation of the nonprofit and the governmental entities. So 3A, 3B, 3C, 3D. Can staff somehow get us, how many thumbs up do we get on this? And I don't know if we have the capability of getting a thumbs down. We don't. So I've kind of seen about 7 or 8, 9, 10. Can staff somehow confirm if I've got that number reasonably right? And if somebody is not comfortable with this language, can we just get you to raise your hand? I'm sorry for the awkwardness of, I mean, this is just the, or indicate in the chat that you're not comfortable with those 4 breakouts. Okay. So it feels like we've got consensus there. Again, that the complicated conversation and complicated discussion, I appreciate the perspectives on that, and imperfect to say the least in a Zoom environment. So thank you for the good discussion. Okay, we're doing all right on time here. I think we've got until 3:40, so hang in there. Section 4 is infrastructure, and the 4A is really just around the broadband and really making sure that we maximize that throughout the state. Steve, do you want to just say a word about the new infrastructure bill? And
sure. Yeah, I'll be brief here. Obviously, folks saw that the infrastructure bill passed, and in it are $65 billion for broadband, and we talked about that as a team. And I talked to our broadband office here at D a little bit about how that changes our projections of what's needed. Upshot of it is there's still a lot needed, and somewhere in the neighborhood of about $170 million is what it's going to take to get the job done on top of what exists as funds right now. But to not get too far in the weeds on that, I think the broader point would just be here that obviously with that bill just being passed and future legislation being contemplated in Washington too, there's just a lot of other moving pieces out there. And I think what might be easiest for this council to do is just to proceed with what we think are the most important recommendations, as we have so far. And the governor, of course, will interpret them in light of whatever other current events or programs, come onto the radar. Paid family medical leave is another example, right? That's in the, at least in the hopper right now for this next package. We'll see, depending on your perspective, whether that lands it or not, but it's obviously in our list too. I think it's probably too hard to triangulate against what might or might not happen there. So it might be helpful for us just to proceed regardless. But in the sense of broadband, just specifically, because it's a very specific thing that's in the infrastructure bill, there's still a pretty big delta between where we're at, what we'd need to sort of fully connect the state.
So this idea would potentially have a price tag of about 170 million, correct?
Yep, that's about right.
Okay. Any revisions, thoughts on this? Jody and Joe, I still see you have your hands up. Is that?
I'm not going to read that whole thing. Where is that generally at? Is it the outstate areas that don't have that, the broadband access, or is there a get it, but they have it accessible, right? So is this mainly an outstate area investment?
You know, you'd be surprised. There are significant pockets of even the 7-county metro area where broadband access is not sufficient. And you'll see counties like Hennepin and Ramsey having their own broadband programs, their own efforts at digital equity. So, you know, I think on the whole, Joe, it is safe to say that Greater Minnesota faces steeper challenges, particularly just geologically, like getting lines in the ground and things like that. But there are spots all over the state that need work. So it's generally seen as a Greater Minnesota priority, but there are pockets of the metro that need it too.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Okay. So do we have thumbs up on item 4, infrastructure and technology, 4A? Okay. All right, let's move on to item 5, childcare. We've got 3 different items in here. The funding the Community Solutions Grant Program. I think 20 million is the number that was associated with this previously. These are the Community Solutions for Healthy Child Development Grants. Focus on children of color, American Indian children, prenatal to grade 3. 5B is about expanding the Child Care Assistance Program. I don't know if there was a specific number associated with this. And is this, I'm assuming this is the state's sliding scale child care program. Again, very much focused on lower income households. 5C is about funding childcare and early education. I think this one at one point had a $300 million price tag. So again, these are big funding systems. Not sure if there's any comments or revisions on any of these 3 concepts. Or if staff or any of the commissioners have anything to say specifically about 5B and kind of a dollar amount or range at all. Nope. Jody, nothing from DHS at all?
Well, I'll say from DEED, 5C is a lot about new businesses, and we have about $10 million in the market right now for those grants or grants like them, and it's not going to cover the state, that's for sure. It's probably about a tenth of what we could overall spend. So, you know, I think this one slides a lot for 5C in particular. The first 2 are more in DHS's wheelhouse, but I think a range in that third one of 10 plus would be maybe how I think about it. If you're looking for numbers to kind of give it some contour.
10 plus million.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that specific to 5C, Steve?
Yeah, that's what I'm just speaking to where DEED kind of intersects with this work, because we have a program that helps, you know, childcare businesses get started. So it's, you know, it's infrastructure stuff. It's, you know, it's hiring. It's some of the components in these bullets. It's not a 1-for-1 match with this idea. So I want to be too careful of projecting our program on what this is, but it's similar. And so if we're looking to try to ballpark it, I would put that number on our radar. But again, I think it could scale for sure.
Okay. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
I'll just add to that. If that number is even anywhere close, Steve, that seems very affordable, given the numbers that we're using to throw around here right now for what kind of impact that could have on people. I think that's my personal opinion. That's awesome.
Okay. Do we have thumbs up for this category, for these 3? 5A, 5B, and 5C. Okay, I saw a few pop up there. All right, item 6 again, is our kind of broad category. We had 4 strategies here that actually all were tied in the initial ranking, and we don't have specific dollar amounts for any of these. The first is about establishing a Minnesota Immigrant Legal Services Fund. The second was about creating a pilot that would incentivize the creation of universal benefits grant programs at the local level. Third is about transformation of the human delivery system, and trying to integrate some of those systems across, I think, departments, large-scale modernization of the different systems, supporting the human services system across the state. And 6D is about providing economic supports for Minnesotans that were ineligible for federal pandemic relief. Is there a range or any help with dollar amounts that staff might have? And then are there comments, revisions, questions about any of the 4 of these?
Paul, I just want to draw your attention to the chat. Marcus had stated about, before we dive into this part of the conversation, Marcus had stated or made the question, I think we're missing something in childcare. What about kids not going to daycare? The kids between ages 6 and 13.
Marcus, do you?
I just want to make it for the record. I mean, we can go forward with what we have, but we were really addressing the front end, the younger kids in childcare. But I think, the word, everything that we heard, childcare is more than just daycare. And some of these kids in this age range don't go to daycare. They're oftentimes having to stay at home, which creates other issues across the board. So just wanting to make note of that. We can't address everything right now, but I wanted to make sure that we note that.
Fair point. Fair point. Okay. Going back to 6, again, did staff or commissioners have anything related to the community strategies identified there? Okay. So we'll need to do some kind of work in order to give a little bit more guidance there as folks consider rankings the next couple of days.
Well, Paul, I'll just maybe, not to keep chiming here, but since you're asking about like the numbers, for 6D, this is, I think, somewhat similar to as I read it anyway, and I've read it since it's been submitted, to the frontline worker pay work. So determining, how to get money directly to workers who are impacted by the pandemic. And so, I mean, that process, as many of you saw it in the news, unfolded unsuccessfully thus far, but $250 million was the amount put on it by the governor and the legislative leaders. So if that's similar to the intent of what this is saying, that's the number that those leaders came to. I share that as context, not as the amount that it should be, but it just gives you a little bit of data on that conversation.
Okay. All right, do we have thumbs up on that cluster, the community strategies? 6A, 6B, 6C, and 6D. Okay. Okay, let's move on to item 7. Opportunity youth workforce. We just had the one concept here in the youth employment, youth engagement and youth employment, kind of that cluster of work that we heard about related to opportunity youth, which I think, if I remember correctly, is like ages 18 to 24 in particular, and really focusing in on engaging that cluster of young people, I think particularly around work skills and making the shift successfully into perhaps post-secondary, but also into the workforce. And somewhere in there, I think there was a $20 million price tag associated with this. I can't remember which version that was. Any comments, questions, revisions on this one? Anything missing? Okay. Folks supportive of this one? Again, in the youth engagement and employment? General thumbs up. Okay. All right, and then healthcare is number 8. Again, we've got 3 here. One is kind of creating this mental health ecosystem collaboration, kind of creating stronger linkages, coordination between county, between health systems, community organizations, using kind of matching funds to kind of create greater collaboration, I think. $25 million per, was that per year that was tagged at?
I can speak to that, Paul. It's actually, it would be matching funds, so 12.5 per center. I think 6 centers for the Metro 3 Greater Minnesota, so 75 million. Okay, and that would be matched by the sponsoring organization or coordinating organization.
And is that over a multi-year period, or?
It probably would be, that it's one-time funding to go to those organizations. So getting the sponsoring organizations over that 3-year period that the funding is available.
Great. Okay. Well, we'll keep going here, and then we'll come back and see if there are questions. Solving the healthcare workforce crisis. Again, a lot of discussion about this one. One-time investment. To create payments and incentives to retain and add and grow frontline workers in the healthcare sector. Again, a lot of discussion about how critical that is across the state. Price tag there generally, if I had at $450 million. And again, I'm not sure if we have any further clarification on that. And then 8C is the launching the paid family medical leave. And on this one, it's the upfront costs of setting up a family medical leave program. Be self-sustaining, they say here in the language, but requires an initial investment to create the infrastructure. $11.4 million is the price tag on that initial investment. Any thoughts, comments, questions, or additions, revisions to any of those? Joe?
The question I have is, what if you like one portion of it, but you don't necessarily agree with all the others? And I'll just be honest, like for me, the 8A jumps out at me. Mental health crises, like easily supportive of that, especially at a $75 million price tag. But I'm just I'm okay with people knowing. 8B, I think is the responsibility of the represented workforce and their people who are negotiating wages on their behalf. But 8A, I think, is absolutely. So how do I indicate my support for one like that, or how do we, put it on the record?
Well, I think you just did.
Okay.
I mean, so you've said your piece, and I think people can take that in, and ultimately, I mean, if you don't want to vote thumbs up on this, you have that option as well, and you'll have an opportunity to rank. So if you don't like that idea, you'll not rank that one very high in your next round of ranking.
Okay.
Paul, there's a comment in the chat. Brenda asked, I have a question on 8A. Has there been any conversation with stakeholders like NAMI around this type of program? And then we also have Brenda, Scott, and Talia with their hands up.
Okay. Penny, is there anything you can respond to on that first question?
I guess the short answer is yes. There has been conversation with NAMIs and other community-based organizations, and happy to work further offline, Paul, as further clarity is needed.
Okay. Brett. Are you there, Brett?
Sorry, Paul, it's just Scott and Talia who have their hands up now.
Oh, okay. Scott, and then Talia.
You know, just with the big price tag on solve the healthcare workforce crisis, I think it would be good to articulate where we're seeing we end up at the end of that. Do we just need another 450 million for the next 3 years? I just don't. It's such a big price tag, and I don't quite understand if there's bottlenecks being relieved or if we're just kind of falling back on this. It's such an emergency, we just have to dump money on it, because there doesn't appear to be it's not really a one-time use if we're just investing in a bunch of things that essentially use taxpayer money or federal money in this case to pay workers more than they can make based on the market forces in place now. For some reason, I don't totally understand how the money helps us through this and gets us to a better place at the end.
Anyone have a response to that? Anyone, commissioners, staff? Okay.
This is
Yep.
Jody. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
I appreciate the concern about using one-time money for a long-term sort of expense, and what about this falling off the cliff at the end of the one-time money? I'm concerned enough about this sector, both healthcare and long-term care, and its current state, that I'm not sure we don't have to try to do something while we have all this money to offer. And you never know what next year looks like, federal or state. And so I'm very concerned about this sector right now, and whether this is exactly the right solution to it or not, I'm not sure. But I'm also concerned that we let this money pass by, don't solve this problem, and wish we had.
I really respect that, and I appreciate the transparency and clarifying it. I understand what you're saying, and it makes sense to me. I hope in the next phase of this commission we can talk about, are there actual sectors of our economy like childcare and healthcare where we need to move to maybe a tax exempt status for workers or something else that creates some kind of sustainability for people we need working, but somehow the market's not paying them enough, or things aren't working to get people into those jobs. But that's for later, and your point's well heard at this time for this money.
Great. Talia, are you? I can't see you there, but I know you're out there.
Sorry, I was muted there. I am out here and I can see you just fine. You look good. You're doing good. I want to talk about 8A for a second. Marcus made a comment in the chat, which I agree with. I'm wondering a little bit about that. I also want to ask why there's a match requirement.
Yeah, I can just speak to that, Leah, that the match was just because I understand how much it's taking to get these up and going, and that's what's actually prohibiting them from going now. But I thought that the state could amplify the efforts by providing that match to a sponsoring organization, because right now it requires all completely on philanthropy. So, which takes years when we need it now. So that was the thought behind that, not having the state fund all of it, but to fund half of the startup costs would get these going more quickly for the people who are in need.
So earlier we were talking about the nonprofit sector, and this mental health is a nonprofit sector, as is healthcare, in places that are remote and isolated. Of course, that's what I think about all the time. Minnesota's philanthropy is giving about 5% of its total giving outside the 7-county metro area. I want to be able to provide context for what people are able to access to do this. And I think that the match is too steep to expect people to have to find those resources. They just don't exist. So I'd recommend removing the match or reducing it significantly. Because the work in and of itself is hard enough, and there is a mental health professional shortage in at least northern Minnesota. That doesn't talk about cultural competency inside of these programs, and depending on the counties and the county hubs that you're in, you're not going to be able to see the cultural competency both with BIPOC and ESL come in. So I want to recommend we drop the match for some of the geographic locations. And then to the point about 8B being like further fleshed out, I'd like to see it a little more fleshed out, and I'd like to see that tie back to the youth development portion that was for the 18 to 24-year-olds that encourage the future generation of healthcare professionals to onboard into our post-secondary institutions. I think that we're too low in our youth development workforce. And I think that that's a reflection of our values. Like when we see big chunks of money, it's also showing some of what we value. And those kids are going to be taking care of me. So I want them to have a really good education. Thank you.
So let's take the second one first. Brenda, were you going to say something earlier on the workforce crisis, the healthcare workforce crisis?
Well, I was going to say something similar to what I think Jody just said, but you know, it is an extreme crisis that we're in. We have National Guard being deployed to staff our healthcare institutions. Some of these one-time money is, you know, even if it is one-time money, for example, in nursing homes, that then gets built into the rate. There, you know, I think is an ongoing need to raise compensation for these low-wage workers in healthcare. And again, I think this is just a response to what is a real crisis in Minnesota for workers in healthcare and what we're seeing every day with our union members.
And Talea, your point on tying it to youth employment. So is part of what you were saying is as you want clarity as to whether there's any connection between the youth employment ideas and/or strategy and the healthcare crisis. Is that what you were getting at? I'm sorry if I didn't capture that.
I think what I would recommend is that we go back up to the youth development portion and add resources to that specifically to get recruitment of youth into colleges to become healthcare workers. So we have a long-term.
Okay.
Well, in conjunction with that, it's then, you know, related to the training and upgrade, reskilling of workers. A lot of the open vacancies are not necessarily college degree required positions, but getting youth into positions in healthcare and then finding them a pathway to move up into other more professional or technical jobs, I think is there's so much overlap, I think, with all of these things.
So I see that staff has gone back up to 7A and added a comma, particularly in healthcare. So just adding that as one of the potential areas that Opportunity Youth might get connected to. So I think that's a good addition. Talea, I just want to understand so you, okay, I get your point there about connecting the healthcare workforce to youth. And then your first question was wanting to eliminate the match in the mental health ecosystem collaboration. Again, Penny, I hate to keep coming back to you on this. Would we, in essence, if it wasn't a match, would we have to, in order to get the 6 pilot programs, would we have to double that then to make it 150 million?
You would, Paul, and I just put in the chat that I think the reason for that was because we also we don't want the state to be accountable for ongoing operational costs. And so that was intended to have organizations who could, at least through philanthropy or other means, could help fund those, so that and have the strength working with community organizations to help support them and have the ongoing sustainability. So that was part of that thinking behind that as well.
Talea, what's your response back to that?
Well, my former experience was starting mental health centers that were culturally based. And it's just really too difficult. There's no seed money for those kinds of operations. I don't know, maybe this needs more detail on what the mental health ecosystem is that we're trying to create. And it brushes up against who do you want to be controlling the mental health services? Because some of the mental health that we're experiencing in our BIPOC communities is created by the racism that's sourced inside of county hubs. So I think that the 8A needs more detail to it.
Okay.
The business, maybe the business model in 8A needs to be further explained inside the problem solving.
I'm happy to go. We do have a performer on this, so there's some knowledge of that. I think your points are exactly spot on. And if we don't do this in a culturally competent way with somebody who can support each other working together in this arena, we will have lost our whole opportunity. And to do it in a non, quite honestly, to have it be more devoid of the systemic racism that has existed in these areas, will be lost. So I'm happy to speak, Paul, with anybody who wants to understand this further and clarify things for them as well. Whatever you think offline an approach might be on that.
So staff will follow up and make any of those connections where if folks are interested in that, let staff know and we can have that follow up. And staff will also have staff follow up with you, Penny, to see if there's any additional information that you have that we might just send out to the council for folks pretty quickly, actually, to just look at in considering this idea.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So we've touched on 8A, 8B, and 8C. We modified 7A a little bit. Any other revisions, comments on the healthcare category? All right. So do we have thumbs up on that category on the 8s? Okay, I see a few.
Paul, can I be a thumbs up with just one last comment? And as you are, call out Penny really quickly. Penny, did we address the broadband to healthcare connectivity in a very explicit way, other than just your comment and then Neil and I and others thumbs up and piled on? And if not, can you at least just make the statement on record?
Yeah,
of how critically important these two are?
I think that just is so cross-cutting to everything that we're trying to do. And I'll just give you an example. I was at the Cambridge Hospital, and 6 miles outside of the hospital, there's no internet connection, so we can't do any telepsychiatry or addiction services whatsoever. 6 miles away from the medical center. So it's just so critical to that education and workforce with more remote work. So that's why I put it in the chat, and I was glad to see the support there. But it's huge for healthcare as well. So that's a great overlap to call out, Jody. Thank you.
Okay, so we have good discussion of the 8 themes. Believe it or not, we're a little bit ahead of time. And I think this next section is really just discussion of additional prioritizing. And two questions I want to put out there for the group. One is everyone comfortable doing another round of ranking following today's meeting, of the specific, the 20, now 22, I think, ideas across the 8 categories, and using that to identify a subset of top priorities. Are folks comfortable doing that? Again, the theme, the approach to the governor would be to say, here's 8 categories that are very important to us, 8 themes, with 22 specific areas. But we really want to lift up these 6 or 7. I don't know what that, we'll see what, kind of the ranking looks like and if there's a clear delineation. Are we comfortable with that? Jeff, do you want to chime in on that?
Yes, I'm kind of an advocate, as we do our staff meetings preparing for these, on this notion of doing another priority ranking. In a lot of the subgroup conversations over these last several weeks that I've been involved with, I've heard from numerous folks on the council the idea of really looking maybe at focus rather than spreading the money around lots of places, for up to 22, 23 ideas. That's pretty broad. I also think a priority list honestly would come closer to the 1.1 billion without doing an exact ledger exercise. I mean, I think if you look at the 23 ideas, we're closer to 3 to 4 billion right now worth of things on the list. And I think it would be more appropriate to the spirit of what the governor asked us to do if we did another exercise and said, okay, these are our top priorities. I'm totally in favor of the notion of still offering all of the items to the administration from the broad group. I think that was part of the intention of having such a broad group of participants. And I guess the analogy I gave to the group as we were talking about was it's kind of like a menu. So the broad array of ideas are the menu, and then maybe we end up with 5 or 6 featured items. And then just as you are welcome to when you go to a restaurant, you can pick items from the features or you can pick items off the menu. You can do whichever you choose. But I think our recommendations would be stronger if we provide both, if we have both a tighter priority list and provide the 8 themes, 23 items.
Can I respond? I couldn't agree more, Jeff and Paul. I think giving the governor 20 items is like saying everything's important. I mean, these are all important things, but I mean, what will we have accomplished if we say to him, everything's important?
Other thoughts?
I guess I would just add from the governor's office perspective and the perspective of the commissioners, I think we agree. The governor reacts quite well to menu-like decision-making when there's a recommendation amongst that menu. I think it's very much in line with how he consumes information on a whole host of things, as well as the lieutenant governor. So it's hard because there's a lot of really good ideas in here, but I think the points made here are strong, and this would be a helpful step from the perspective of us here in government too.
Okay, other?
Paul, a question for you. When you talked about re-ranking, I've got no problem doing that exercise. I don't know if it was Steve or maybe it was Neil who made the comment in regards to having instead of $4 billion worth of ideas, let's put reasonable estimates there and give them all of them that a la carte style. Would we be able to rank it that way as well? I'll just use as the example 8B, A, B, and C. Would we be able to put dollar values and then rankings on each one of those, or only as a whole? Because I think that might be important because, in the end, we don't have unlimited amount of funds and we have more ideas than we have funds, and they all are important. But, I'm sure the governor is going to try to pick which ones he can do to get up to that 1.15 billion to have the biggest effect.
I think the idea was you can rank 8B, 2A, 4C. I mean, you're picking whichever specific items you want, and I think it may be helpful to have an eye toward the 1.15 billion, but we're not going to like shut your ranking off if your dollar meter went over.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, I like the idea of ranking as well. I think before we select how many we're going to offer up, I think seeing what we all rank would make a really good exercise. So if it's 6, 8, 4, then we would know based on the ranking, because there likely is going to be a cliff where here's the big focus areas.
Totally agree.
I agree, and what we talked about with staff was giving everyone 5 rankings. So rank your top 5, and we'll look as a group at so how do all of these ideas shake out in terms of those 5, and whether there's a clear delineation between 5 and everything below that really doesn't have a lot of consensus, or if it's 7 and we'll have to kind of see what that looks like, and we can kind of debate that next week, when we get the rankings back on do we want to recommend the top 5. Again, I think the governor will see the full menu, but the question is, what do we want to say about the top 5? If you look at the chart, or when we did the original rankings, there was pretty clear delineation actually among. There were a top 6 or 7 that really clearly in the rankings really did kind of rise to the top. But again, now that you're only looking at 20 or 22 as opposed to 40, your rankings might change, and that's what we want to capture.
Plus, the first exercise, we only ranked within themes, and this is the opportunity to do cross themes.
Yes, thank you. Yes.
This may come up when we get to that point where we have the 5, but ensuring that the 5 we pick still hold the values that we talked about at the beginning, because there could be a situation where it's the 5 big things, but it doesn't meet the criteria that we've laid out. So making sure that we give weight to where we have criteria creep.
Yep. And I would suggest let's resend those criteria. Staff will resend those criteria when we send out the ranking, whatever the link to the ranking is. It's a great point, Marcus. Other thoughts? So folks are comfortable with this next round of ranking. Let me ask the question. Do we also want to rank the themes among the 8 themes? That could be another level, and again, it may that could be another level of messaging. But again, the specific strategies might be message enough. Jeff, any thoughts on that as my co-chair?
I saw Jody shaking her head. No, I'd love to hear her perspective.
I think we're not that we're past that, but we did that. And I think that by the time you now say, here's the 20 and we start ranking this, by the nature of that, that starts to elevate. So I'm not sure that it doesn't just mean that we're spending more time re-ranking the rankings versus now that we're to the specifics, but that's just an N of 1. I'll do whatever you tell me to.
The good news is I don't believe that for a minute. That's great. It's a very good point. I agree.
I mean, when we do the final presentation, we also could present themes sort of in the order that we ranked them the last time, just to at least kind of lay it out that way without having to do another exercise potentially.
But Marcus does have a counterpoint. So in the opportunity in the focus areas to develop solutions, Marcus, do you mean that as you're now seeing it come to light, that there feels like there's gaps?
Yeah, I think that came out definitely in childcare. Joe made a point, he was surprised that we didn't have as many thumbs go up. And it's I think in some of these areas, maybe there's still opportunity that we don't have time to bring solutions forward, but maybe we still have it as a focus area because we heard childcare resoundingly across the board, right?
That's a really good point.
Other perspectives, other thoughts?
Just so I'm clear, just maybe others are thinking the same thing. So we already have ranked the themes. Like that's happened once. Is the thinking that we would not take the result of that, I guess maybe somewhat more informal ranking process and incorporate it into the final recommendation to the governor? And therefore we would need to do another version of that same exercise? Because I think ranking the ideas is somewhat unique from ranking the themes, but we have already ranked the themes. Is the sense that we would not convey the data on that initial ranking of themes to the governor, but we would need to do it again in a more official sort of end of the road moment? Is that kind of how you're thinking about it?
I think so. I mean, with the discussion we've just had through all these, maybe we've changed our mind, or our positions have changed. We've had a lot more dialogue the last 3 weeks since we ranked them the first time.
Got it.
Jeff, are you okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I really think, given the limitations of Zoom and the unfortunate that we've not been able to personally be with and meet each other, I mean, to me, it's so important that we hear the voice of everyone. And to me, the ranking exercises, whether they're themes or ideas, that's a great shot at, okay, it's 3 more weeks of information. Why not do it again and see what we come up with? Ultimately, I mean, we've all agreed, I don't know the exact number, the 23 that's on there, and the 8 themes. So, I mean, we know what the general menu is going to look like and what the emphasis will be, and we'll talk at our next meeting on the best way to present that to the governor and lieutenant governor. But I do think if we're going to refine down to prioritization, we might as well take as fresh a look as we can at it.
I do think ranking themes would be helpful to the governor and lieutenant governor. Again, whether we use that previous version or a future version, I think using a future version sounds great to me, but I do think that'll help. It'll be interesting to see where the votes net out, obviously, because you can all imagine a scenario in which an idea is ranked number 1, but the theme that's underneath is ranked number 6 or something. We'll see, but you know, we can all contemplate that once the voting happens.
So Amy put in the excuse me, in the chat. She's correct. This is a dot vote, as if you were in a strategic planning session and you had 5 dots. So it's not a ranking. So we will rank the 8 themes, 1 through 8. Then you will have 5 dots to assign to the 22 or the 23 strategies. And Amy and I were talking earlier today, and I think the staff had agreed, if you want to use 5 of those dots on one idea, you can. Am I right about that, staff or commissioners?
Yes, Paul, that's correct.
Okay. Or you can spread them out. So again, it's kind of where's your passion, and so this is going to be hard for me. I know, because I got a lot of things that I really like and I really hope will rise up. But that I'm sure that'll be the case for all of us.
And I'm just going to throw this out as a commentary. I mean, I worry a little that putting 5 dots on one thing is kind of manipulative. Is that really what you would recommend to the governor? You'd recommend one thing out of the whole list? That's the only thing out of all the things we've talked about? I mean, if you can't truly say yes to that, then I'm not sure putting 5 dots on one thing is the right thing to do.
I want to be devil's advocate. I didn't raise my hand. I'm sorry.
Okay. Go ahead.
I don't know. I mean, I hear that the governor and lieutenant governor want ranking. I think about the citizens of Minnesota seeing that and how that reflects on us as good champions of all of Minnesota, and wonder whether or not we should be ranking those things because we don't have the denominating factors that would rank those as the priorities. And it isn't really our call.
To me, Talea, I think that to Steve's earlier point, and I mean, I think you raised a really good point here, but to Steve's earlier point that the governor and lieutenant governor need our advice as they are going into a negotiation with the legislature, and that our ranking and prioritization helps them, because they need to rank and prioritize as they go into that negotiation. And so having not just a full menu of 23 ideas and 8 categories helps them. They are asking us to be the voice of Minnesota, whether fairly or not. They are asking us to reflect on that and give our best advice. And Steve, I heard you say they really like to see that prioritization in that. So
they do, and I think a lot's going to evolve moving forward. We know that there's a ton of dynamics that they're going to navigate politically, but I think that a list of 23 or 4 ideas would be hard if that was the only thing that was put forward. I think it would be helpful. It doesn't mean that they're going to take the full recommendation of the council. Obviously, again, a lot to navigate against, but I think it would be useful. But I mean, I get your point, Clay. I mean, it's sort of there's so many apples and oranges here, right? That it is a hard thing to do. There's no question.
To Scott's point in the chat there, I I agree with that as well. That we are still sharing the broader set of ideas and the broader categories. And what we're saying is here's 8 themes, 8 categories, and 23 ideas that we really do think are important, and we'd like you to take a look at these. And within that, we are lifting up 6 or 7 or whatever of those as particularly higher priority. I'm trying to look at it as a both and.
And Paul, if I could just add one quick thing. Childcare, we've talked about a lot. It's come up a lot. I didn't put childcare high up in my own rankings, only because I've not seen a way that it really lends itself, in my view, to one-time money. But so when we think about our priorities against the objectives and the framework that we started, it helps some things to rise to the top, but it doesn't mean that things don't rise to the top are not important. They just may not be the right place to focus this effort. At least that's my view.
I'm just disagreeing. That's why I have a bougie job, right? I argue all the time. What if we already did the ranking by showing up with these 20 items and we feel like this is good work that represents all different kinds of walks of life and locations in Minnesota? We haven't done a policy review. Brenda had pointed that out. And there's some things that I know a great deal of the policy work behind this, but I don't know that I was asked to serve on this council for that. And I also think about, we were not really clear about what kind of economy we wanted for Minnesota to determine what it is that we're seeking to gain out of these prioritizations. So like, we don't have anything about technology put into our top 20 here, but we had conversations about bringing in new economic growth for Minnesota.
Just a clarification, don't we have technology in a platform like what is used by a bunch of the nonprofits and some of the other groups? What I thought, Steve, you had made a comment a couple meetings ago about what it would cost to bring up to date the technology platform. I just can't remember which one it was. I'm probably not even saying that right, but
yeah, Joe, I think you're referring to the idea in the workforce idea about modernizing the systems for workforce development. Is the idea.
Yes.
I think Talia is probably referring though to some broader, bigger ideas on like a tech workforce fund and things like that were maybe a little more centric to just tech. Is that right, Talia?
Yes.
Yeah.
The one thing about the dollar figures, yeah, we got 4 billion up there right now, but how precise are those numbers across the board, right? So like we could be ranking these top 5 that gets to 1.15, billion, but the precision on the amount needed, and like if you did invest this much versus you only did half, what type of impact? There's so much dynamic to it. So to kind of to Leah's point, I'm like, we've given 20, maybe we can get closer, but it would be, I don't know, it wouldn't be a complete story for us to try to rank and try to get into a budget number, and these are imprecise numbers of what's needed for the actual investment. Because the 20 items we've ranked, and we've made sure that those are important things that we pulled out, and we've had some pretty good debate about that even. But then not having, or having to get down even further may cause, the message that we want to get across to not be, the most authentic to the group. So just something, the precision is throwing me off, because I see numbers with 500 million, 450, billion or million, all those things, and it's not very precise because the policy review has not been done.
Other thoughts? Any other council members that haven't weighed in on this? Tracy or Scott? Penny?
This is Tracy, and I hear what everybody's saying, and I think this is very difficult. But at the same time, I feel like we haven't done our job too if we don't provide some more refined guidance. I mean, it doesn't mean the governor's office has to do what we said, but I also can see why there is a concern that there's things that aren't on this list that got talked about. I agree with that 100%. I'm thinking about a graphic too. Just in my mind, I like to think of patterns and themes, and I'm going to send it to Jeff and Paul just so that you can see it, but where, sometimes broader themes are represented in a certain color. We have a whole bunch of ideas, and I think if we looked at our individual ideas, and let's say we had to color around the outside of a circle related to the idea, we're going to see that those broad themes show up in some of those ideas, like not technology, broadband. It's going to show up in a whole bunch of the individual ideas that we have. So to see how our big themes are represented in the ideas, and I think that those are going to show up in multiple categories. And there's something about that for me that, again, is kind of a prioritization. You got an idea, an amount of money tied to it, and it crosses over 5 of the different broad categories that we ranked in the top. That is a way of prioritizing that isn't 1, 2, 3, 4. This idea represents many different categories. But Paul and Jeff, I'll just send you this graphic so that you can see it.
Well, I think that actually, that gets at what I was referring to as the both and, right? The opportunity to both highlight these 8 categories, these 23 ideas, and what you're suggesting is let's visually, maybe there's a way to visually enhance, 5, 6, or 7 of those. It doesn't have to necessarily be here's 1 through 6 and here's the rest. And again, I think it's a way to. I really do think this is a both and to the point of, again, I'm just really being transparent here. To the point of, we haven't had a deep policy review. We have not had a deep policy review. That is exactly correct. The governor asked us to sit down over 8 weeks, right, or so, right, and give us his best, he and the lieutenant governor's best thinking. So whether we were bamboozled or something, this is the task that we were given, was to dig in as best we could in a very short period of time, and come up with our best thinking. And again, you have heard me say almost every meeting that I recognize the limits of this process. I recognize the speed of this process. I agreed to this process even though I knew it was far too short, with really heavy issues, right, at stake, and the ability, Marcus, to your point, and several points of people have raised this point, Jeff has raised this point, in terms of the specifics of the numbers. I'm ranking and voting on principles, on what ideas do I think can have an impact in the short run. The numbers are, I don't want to say the numbers are irrelevant, they aren't, and I really do like some of those smaller scale ideas that have really big impact, right, that can really accelerate. I am kind of looking for those, but But for the most part, these numbers are just huge regardless. And it's more about what do I think in the short run, in this first phase, can have, you know, an impact and can really be used in the context of the things that I have heard all of us really value, and making some of those tough decisions. So I'm sorry to go on that rant. Penny, I don't know if you or Scott or Nanoko, Brenda, I saw you had a point in the chat there, and we'll try and wrap up here in a few minutes.
Yeah, just quickly, I like your both end approach, Paul. I think that we don't have to lose the ideas that we've given, but I think we should try to prioritize those that we think per the criteria that we created ourselves are most impactful. And I actually like Jeff's idea of maybe voting one vote for each of our top 5, so we don't, you know, kind of drop into over-representational thinking on anything. So that's it. That's the other thing I would say.
Okay. Anybody else, Scott? Nanoko?
I think I've said mostly said my piece. I am keen to rank, even as I recognize all the concerns raised, and I think there is a risk that people sort of 5 up on things, and I kind of like the idea of having to vote on 3 to 5 things each. It's hard to manage these kind of voting processes, but I think that will allow us also to save, you know, save our votes to recognize some of those low dollar amount ideas that have a lot of merit. But I kind of don't want to blow 3 of my, you know, 5 votes on a $15 million idea with everything that's at stake here. So I think that spreading it out a little will give a really nice representation. I think we'll all feel like it reflects our thinking.
Nanoko?
Yeah, thank you. I'm going back and forth because I hear Talia's point. These are all very important. And I think for me at this point, I really feel like we just need to make sure that, to Marcus's point earlier, that those folks that we're trying to center, whether they're rural people or BIPOC or tribal, whatever they might be, are the ones being centered here. And I just feel like there are just a lot of things I don't know about other industries. So that's part of the reason why I'm stuck. I'm like, do I say housing because that's what somebody told me we should vote is for housing, versus something that I know really well, and this is what's passionate to me. So I go back and forth on that. So I don't necessarily have a great solution here.
Okay, so we've got about 5 minutes left here. So again, at the risk of trying to drive towards consensus, really good discussion, some different opinions out there. I think I'm hearing some broader agreement that we ought to rank the categories, the themes, and that we ought to use the 5 dots, not allow 5 on one idea or clustering of any of those dots. And let's see where we come out. And again, we'll come back next week and be able to kind of continue the discussion, see what that looks like. We'll think about, we'll have staff and others look at Tracy's idea around some different visual ways to present that information. And we will resend our criteria, kind of those core guiding values in terms of a reminder to what we're centering as we're using these 5 dots, and we'll go from there. Jeff, did you have anything to add there?
I mean, just to get people thinking about it, this doesn't have to be determinative, but you know, as we've chatted about how this would be presented, one thought we had was we would present all 8 themes. We'd ask all of you to participate, and we'd have basically 2 council members per theme. So the themes would be very front and center, and then it's like, okay, if it turns out one of the priority items is in that theme, they'll have already had a little priority list, and you can flag that again. But the intent is not we're going to end up with 5 items and the rest get put in an appendix. The intent is we're going to present the 8 themes with people who are passionate about each one of them, but still highlight a few prioritized items based on the ranking exercise we do here.
Okay. Any final comments?
When we make recommendations, do we have any role in how these funds are delivered or released?
I would defer to commissioners, but my sense is we are giving guidance to the governor and the lieutenant governor, and they and in some cases we do have the opportunity to say how, I guess, and we can talk a bit more about that. But I still think we're pretty far from, kind of the agreements that'll be made with the legislature and pretty far from any, administration or allocation of those funds. That happens, I'm guessing, more at the department levels. Steve or Jody or
yeah, I think that's right, Paul. I mean, the level, the sort of the altitude of description on these ideas right now, I think we're pretty comfortable with. It's specific enough to know exactly what issue we're tackling on, the flavor of the solution, but the program dynamics aren't completely spelled out. There may be times throughout the session as the programs get developed and legislation gets written where we come back and engage, but I don't think the governor ever expected this group to come forward with like super detailed policy prescriptions on the programmatics of it, if you know what I mean. I think the level of detail at this point is super helpful, and it gives he and the LG a little bit of chance to maneuver based on other dynamics that they'll have to navigate. So
I would add it's also helpful that we've been in these meetings listening to all of your conversation. And so when it comes down to specific fiscal notes and very specific bill language, we'll be consulted on all of that. And if we have any questions, we can get back to some of you.
Paul, only question I have, and this might be for you, Jeff, or any of the staff, is just in regards to the dollar values. I mean, I'm assuming that it's not going to frighten the governor and the lieutenant governor to see these numbers, even if they aren't accurate. I guess that was my point. If they aren't accurate, is it better to have them in or out, to Marcus's point? In assuming they know that they got to look at what the dollar values is themselves, right? I mean, I wouldn't want them to see something, be scared off of it because of the number he or she with the lieutenant governor.
Yeah, I mean, one final cut we may do is no precise numbers. Just they all need little ranges because none of them are precise. And then secondly, definitely caveat language of
okay.
This is an 8-week project. We did not have, I mean, we're just doing the best we can. But I do think it's helpful to ballpark what's a $20 million ask and what's a $500 million ask in the scheme of confined amount of money.
Okay, well, on that note, we're going to adjourn. I just so appreciate your good work today. Really good dialogue, hard dialogue, good questions. I appreciate everybody sticking with it. And just acknowledge, we're all sprinting here, trying to get to a deadline that we didn't choose. But it is the one that's in front of us. And so again, just really appreciate your work. So look for something from staff here pretty quickly within a day or two. And again, huge thanks. And thanks to the staff for the hard work kind of coming in today, especially. Really appreciate it. All right, thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.